Thank you. Thanks, Jerry. Thank you for that unenthusiastic applause. I appreciate that. And that sitting ovation. But anyway, I beg a lot when I get up here. I happened to tell Jerry when he gave me the topic today, 99.5% of you don't know that I started out in the business covering regular news in Washington, D.C., where I grew up. And my first job after I got out of grad school was as a news reporter for WWDC Radio in Washington, which at the time was a middle-of-the-road music station. But we also had the best local news operation in the city. I mean, our ratings were through the roof. We were, in a sense, Philadelphia's KYW, Washington's KYW. And to be in that group, shortly after I arrived, about 2 or 3 months later, Maury Povich came into the same operation. We had a lot of familiar names there. But the thing about inaugurations and presidents and so forth, my first assignment, believe it or not, was covering Congress and the White House. And I was there for the Kennedy administration back in the early 60s. And I mean, even President Kennedy acknowledged me because he saw me around a lot. I never got a chance to interview him because I was, you know, still wet behind the ears in a sense. But it was still a fascinating time and a way to kind of see what regular news was about as opposed to what sports would be to me as I finally worked my way into it, because I was definitely a sports guy. But I wanted to recount what happened at his first inauguration in 1961. The night before the inauguration on January 20th, on the 19th, Washington, D.C. had one of the worst snowstorms that we've ever had. We had about 1.5 feet of snow, and the snow was blowing right on through the evening, probably up until about 1 or 2 in the morning. They had so much snow on Pennsylvania Avenue, which was the parade route from where the inauguration was at the Capitol, down to the White House, so that the Kennedys could either walk while they were going to ride, I believe is what they did, that at about 9 o'clock, or maybe, in fact, it was earlier than that, because I was on my way home from covering all the pre-inauguration stuff, about 7:30 or 8 o'clock, I can't quite remember the exact time, when an announcement came on that they were looking for volunteers with shovels to start shoveling the snow off Pennsylvania Avenue and the entire parade route where people would sit and walk on sidewalks and things of that nature. So they had to not only clear all those chairs of the snow, and we had almost 1.5 feet of snow. I mean, that's how much there was. People came out of the woodwork with shovels. I mean, there must have been 20,000 people that night and all through the night, and they didn't finish doing all the shoveling until about 11 in the morning. Well, the swearing in was at noon, as you know. But they got it done. I couldn't believe that Pennsylvania Avenue was totally clear of snow. Now they had plows for the main part of the avenue, but there were still a lot of guys with shovels out there doing the same thing. And they not only had to have a place to put whatever they shoveled, they had big dump trucks coming in and shoveling that stuff into the trucks. And it was just an amazing scene, because if you look at all the newsreels in those days about the swearing-in ceremonies, they had to clear all those chairs for the people that sat up on the stage where he was inaugurated, and so forth. I mean, there wasn't a hint of snow. I mean, it was a beautiful day on Inauguration Day, bright sunny sky, clear skies. So, to me, it was a fascinating transition from one day to the next. And on my way home that night, at about 8 o'clock, I stopped at a red light on Connecticut Avenue, because I lived in Northwest Washington. And walking across the street to a hotel as the light was changing, I saw the great singer Lena Horne and her bodyguard, Big Daddy Lipscomb, who played for the Baltimore Colts, 6'7", 350 pounds. And right then the thought crossed my mind, can I jump out with my recorder and do an interview before the light changes? Obviously, that didn't work, but so I kept on moving. But I'll tell you, Lena Horne, she was in her 40s then, and she was one good-looking lady, I'll tell you, and she could sing, as I'm sure Peggy knows all about that. So it's just interesting that that was my inauguration scene. Now, of course, once the next day occurred, then I was doing all sorts of interviews all over the place. But it really is sort of a fun thing to think about in those days when I was just covering straight news before I worked my way into sports. But I'll tell you one thing, I'm very happy I got into sports because I got tired of politicians blowing smoke in my face. I won't go any further than that. I think Dom has arrived to take charge here, and we thank him for breaking the speed limits from Harrisburg to get here. Thanks, Dom.
One more story, Don. As Estelle Getty would say, picture this. 1968 convention. Camera on my shoulder, film. Cine A. Here we are walking down with Larry Kane and Bob Feldman, the producer. Up walks Walter H. Annenberg. And who might this be, Mr. Kane? This is Mr. Kravitz. Picture this. Wearing a bright, fluorescent, neon Nehru jacket. 1968. Walter says, well, you are not working anymore. Now remember, he was my boss, WFIL TV. He said, you will now be walking with Mr. Milhouse Nixon, the next president of the United States, because you're getting more attention than he is. Picture this. Here comes George W. Bush off the plane. I'm wearing an NYPD jacket. You know how they used to have it? I got on the set of the NYPD filming. He comes off. I got my camera on my shoulder. Remember, I was the shoulder guy. He comes straight up to the press. We thought he was going to do an interview. He looks at me, he says, trade jackets. He's wearing the presidential light spring jacket. We both started taking our jackets off. The Secret Service whisked him away, and he yelled back, I tried, kid. And just to say thank you to everyone in this room who contacted me from my incapacitation the last 3 months. And I really appreciate your words, the kindness, the Facebook stuff that came on. So thank you again, and I still love you all, maybe. Thank you.
And now we don't need to stall anymore because Dom's here from Harrisburg. So we'll bring him up, Broadcast Pioneers member Dom Giordano.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks very much. Sorry for the delay, a bit of weather, and Tom Corbett in Harrisburg. I'm going to bring up the people that are going to work with me to talk about the presidency and broadcasting, and then only tell one war story myself of covering the Obama 2008 that involved sleeping on an air mattress with a guy's cat jumping over me all night long. That's the best we could do for a room. That's CBS. No, it was due to the fact we actually had to try to figure out if a boat could get me out of Washington after the inaugural. That's how crowded it was. That's how intense it was. And I don't know. I've only been to a couple of inaugurals. I've never seen anything like the crush of certain streets where literally people, it was beyond passed out, had to be lifted over the crowd. There were that many people there. It was that intense. The only presidential story that I have up close was George Bush at Westchester 2000. I'm interviewing Laura Bush in a back room of a gym. He comes in and says, I'm sweating like a pig. Anybody got a shirt that might fit me? Same thing as Bob Kravitz, as I'm trying to get the shirt. His kid comes running, Sarah, I have the shirt, I have the shirt. There was my Bush moment to trade shirts with him that went awry. All right, so let's bring up the people that are going to talk about broadcasting and the presidency with me today. We have Dick Sheeran with us. We have Terry Ruggles is with us today. Bill Baldini. Hi, Dick. Jay Lloyd. Hi, Jay. Good to see you. Good to see you. And Chris May. Now, I know you're looking at this group and saying, this looks like the Obama cabinet. Where are the women? But Sherry Bank was on this, and her daughter sadly has the flu, as many people do. So, without further ado, I'd like to start with Dick Sheeran and go around the room. I'm sure almost everyone here has a contact or a sense or a thought about covering presidents, about the way we cover presidents, or maybe some kind of personal remembrance of something you remember around presidential coverage or post-presidential. Dick, who would you like to start out? What do you remember?
I'd love to start out. By the way, speaking of things presidential, I have breaking news from Atlantic City. The White House sub shop has reopened.
Hey!
And that's just a lead-in to a story I love to tell that you probably have heard. Some of you regulars have heard it. Okay, bear with me if you have. The year is 1979. Jimmy Carter is in the White House. The Iranians are holding our people hostage. And Carter is running against Ronald Reagan. And he can't go out to campaign because it wouldn't be right to do that while the hostages were being held. So he had to stay at the White House to stay on top of the situation. So he was inviting reporters from around the country, and three of us from Westinghouse at the time were invited to interview Mr. Carter in the White House. So I was pretty excited as a local yokel reporter. So I called my wife, and I said, guess where I'm going tomorrow? She said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to the White House. She says, bring me back 2 cheese subs. That's my favorite White House story. That's where, I think she's there now, because we live in Atlantic City. So, but I'll just start off.
Hey, Dick,
with
well,
that.
let me ask you,
Yeah,
I want
go
to
ahead.
contrast that because I know Chris May has interviewed President Obama recently.
Yeah.
The level that I know he went through just to do, I mean, even with Mitt Romney, when I interviewed him here, was incredible. And he wasn't anywhere near the presidency, as we found out later.
Right.
But when you went there to talk with President Carter, level of security, the type of stuff you went in, and then I'm going to go to Chris and just contrast it, and I think it's probably like night and day.
It is. As a matter of fact, I remember driving our car down there,
Right.
because the crew was already there, and they had an advance word on who, we were
Right.
coming, and you had to show ID at the gate, and we actually drove in and parked on the grounds there. There was a space to
Wow.
park. And it was, the level of security was totally different. By the way, we did the interview in the map room, which was really, it was very, you got goosebumps, really, because that's where Franklin D. Roosevelt followed World War II, the campaigns of World War II. And of course, the maps, some of the maps were still there. And it was really, you just felt history there. And it was quite exciting. But you're right about the security, totally different.
Before we go to Chris, my story was we're doing this with one of the Bush campaign, George Bush Jr., W. Bush, and Oliver North standing there with me, who I know. They won't let him into the White House. There's one little thing wrong in the thing. We know you're Oliver North. It doesn't matter. You're not getting in. I mean, for like an hour and a half, Oliver North, and this is at the time they brought us there in these big heated tents, and they gave us everybody to try to put him over the top. It was probably 2004, I think, or right before that, or 2002, the congressional elections. Oliver North couldn't get in the White House. Didn't matter. These guys didn't care. Signed autographs with him, but he didn't get in the White House.
Yeah.
Chris, how about you with the level of
Well,
scrutiny?
it was as you might imagine, very impressive. I guess I should take you back first to when this all happened. This was July of 2011. It was at the height of this past debt ceiling debate, and at the time, I had probably spent the better part of 2 years haranguing people at the White House with emails and phone calls and trying to get an interview with President Obama, who I had never had I'd had a chance to speak to briefly in Reading, but it was one question and then right out the door when he was a candidate. But for the better part of 2 years, we'd been trying to get this interview, and nothing would ever come back. And all of a sudden, on a Wednesday afternoon, a call came out of the blue from the White House, and the word was, you can speak with the president tomorrow at 2 o'clock at the White House. It wasn't, can you be here? Does this work with your schedule? 2 o'clock tomorrow at the White House. So, of course, we hopped on a train. We overnighted there. We were at the White House by noon the next day. And as far as security, we went to the gate. We of course, presented our information, our media credentials. We had 2 escorts who took us from the gate. We walked through a metal detector, of course, and he took us into a holding room. And like Dick, we had our interview with the president in the map room, which, as he mentioned, FDR.
Right.
And there's other history there. That's also the same room where Bill Clinton gave his deposition in the Monica Lewinsky investigation. So I thought that was just as interesting as well.
Take any souvenirs, Helmut?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. Speaking of security, there was a bathroom actually in the map room.
Right.
And so, being the TV guy that I am, I decided about a half hour before our interview was set to start that I would go in and put on the makeup that I need to look presentable on TV. And so that normally takes about 10 minutes. So I thought, well, it's a half an hour till our interview. It'll take me 10 minutes. I'll be back out in 20 minutes. So I walked into the bathroom. I asked a Secret Service agent, is this okay? He said, fine, go right ahead. So I'm in the bathroom putting on the finishing touches. And I go to open the door, and as I do, the Klieg lights in the room are on. The room is filled with people, and I look to my left, and there I see the back of the head of the 43rd President of the United States, who I'm there to interview, and a Secret Service agent is at the bathroom who had no idea I was there. And he whipped around, and I thought he was going to throw me to the ground and handcuff me, but fortunately I was able to explain exactly who I was and what I was there to do. But it just goes to show the president occasionally will arrive early. In this case, he was about 20 minutes early. But that's how our interview got started, and it went from there.
Bill Baldini, you don't seem like the type of guy that know you would be impressed with any of these presidents or anything like that, right? You would ask them the same sorts of questions as if you were covering a murder in Philadelphia.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when I first covered Lincoln,
Yeah.
very nice man.
The movie's pretty good,
Very
too.
nice
Yeah.
man. Now, I had the good fortune of speaking to every president since Lyndon Johnson in person. But one of my favorite stories is Bill Clinton. When he first was president, I think he was a month into his office, he decided that he's going to travel around the country and talk to main anchors on all the major cities. So I was representing Channel 10. Jim Gardner was representing Channel 6, and a fellow named Hamilton was doing Channel 3.
Right.
So we had to go to Hyde Park. That's where Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a home. So we got into Hyde Park, and naturally, Clinton is late. He's always late. And I got bored, and the more I get bored, the crazier I get. So I told my cameraman, this guy, Tom Watson, who also had a screw loose, I said, Tom, when that president comes in, we're at a living room setting with a fireplace. I said, when he comes in that door, I'm going to get up and I'm going to walk over to him, and I'm going to introduce myself, and I want you to shoot it natural sound. In other words, just let it roll from the moment I move. He goes, they're going to arrest you. I said, yeah, probably. So he's okay. So naturally, Clinton comes walking in that door. I swear to God, I jumped up, and everybody was like, what? And I ran over and I said, hi, I'm Bill Baldini from Philadelphia. And he said, hi, I'm Bill Clinton from Arkansas. Right there, I am arrested. I am lifted off the ground. And he goes, what are you guys doing? This is Bill Baldini from Philadelphia. He puts his arm around me. This guy, Bill, come on, how you doing? I said, great. He said, what do you think of this place? I said, I loved it. I toured this place. He said, no shit. I said, yeah. He said, what's it like? And we're walking over to the fireplace, and you can see everybody's like in shock. This Baldini guy's nuts. And I said, I'll tell you what, there's two things that really impressed me. I have a whole room dedicated to the Depression, where you see these soup lines and all these men there in suits, getting free soup. And I said, it's just so sad when you see all these pictures. And the other thing that really amazed me was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's desk. They have it roped off. And the desk is there, and I looked at it, and I noticed that there were no pictures of his family on that desk, only pictures of his dogs. And he goes, you're kidding. I said, no, I'm telling you the truth. In fact, I decided to get close. So it's roped off, and it says, do not pass this line. Naturally, I did. I stepped on the rug and set off alarms where I was arrested before. They wouldn't know what I was doing. I told them. They finally let me go, and he said, and this is the greatest line. He looks at me and he says, man, that's fascinating. I love that guy. I want to see all that stuff. Do you think they'll allow me to do it? I swear, I said, hey, Bill, you're the President of the United States. You can do anything you want. He goes, I can't get used to this stuff. And right there, his personality was so charming. When he got in trouble with Monica Lewinsky, I understood it in a second. This guy was unbelievable. He did have a sense of getting along with people, and I think he tried, but I think he succeeded in becoming one of the guys. That's how he presented himself. Even when we did the interview, he was one of the guys. He spoke to me like we're buddies. And I think that's why he was very effective.
Terry Ruggles, you're reminiscent, but let me ask you this, what Bill said. What do you think of the coverage, locally or nationally, of any of the recent presidents? I mean, is it your sense of penetrating that and really trying to get viewers or listeners a sense of what they're all about? What's the hurdles? What's the difficulties?
I think the problem is every reporter wants to have the gotcha question. And
Right.
we're just so the media wants the gotcha question, but the White House has media people who are experts that are never going to let that happen.
Right.
So I think a lot of local journalists want to make a name for themselves and do the gotcha question. I think it's a quid pro quo on the national level. They know what their sources are going to tell them, and those sources tell them because they want it out in the media. I wanted to spin back and talk about pre-presidential, presidential, and post-presidential as far as the security goes, if we could.
Sure.
George Herbert Walker Bush just walked into the station before he became president. It was the primary, and he just walked into the station. There was no bodyguard, there was no advance man. He just drove up in his own car. Now,
Wow.
at Channel 10, I don't know how many of you remember Jim Walker. He went on to work for ABC, but he was George Herbert Walker Bush's cousin. So we knew at Channel 10 all about George Herbert Walker Bush because Jimmy and Billy and I sat next to each other, and he would just talk about what was going on in Kennebunkport and whether George was going to run. And you remember that big terrible hurricane they had that wiped out the compound out there in Kennebunkport? I said, Jimmy, you going to fix it up? He says, it all depends on whether George decides to run or not. So George Bush just walks in, and just like Jay and I, we're just talking. We sat in the cafeteria and talked for half an hour before the show goes on.
Wow.
Then, a couple times, I'm down at the White House, not in the one-on-one as Chris has, but ironically, I was down there with Lonnie Stevens and Chuck Williams for the assault weapon signature that Bill Clinton did just
Right.
this month. Is the anniversary. And you know, when you're a local reporter, you're a reporter of opportunity. You ask questions as a moment of opportunity. Well, there we are with the camera, but at the White House, everything is choreographed and scripted, and it's like an interior decorator who has the couch is going to be here, and the icebox is going to be here, kind of a thing. And that's what you have to do when you go to the White House. You're herded here, you're herded there. Well, Lonnie and Chuck and I, we just started popping questions as the president's leaving. Mr. President, yeah. Within a half an hour, they kicked us off the White House. We were gone. We were just out. We had gone against the etiquette of what the rules are there. There's a whole protocol. Same thing, I was at the White House when Reagan welcomed the 76ers when Moses Malone and company won. And we were in the Rose Garden for that. And it was the same kind of thing. We would go up and try to ask questions, and the Secret Service would push us here. And then the other local stations would do the same thing. They would fill our void. While the Secret Service was handling us, somebody from KYW would run
Hey,
over
Terry,
to
did
do
you
that.
find, too, I've had this happen to me, actually, with a guy with the Fox News channel. I know Michelle Bachmann, we've done stuff with her. She yells to me, and yells my name out in front of all these guys. The guy starts mocking me because we're not national. So it's not just the Secret Service, it's the
There's an
national
attitude
media, if they're
down
there.
there.
And how dare you, even if it's Philadelphia with Chris or New York or somebody like that, you don't ask anything.
Yeah.
You know, you're in the presence of the national guys.
Let me give my post real quickly. And they're going to, this is pre-president, then post. They're going to dedicate the Roebling Building in Trenton. And Richard Nixon is coming up from Saddle River, and he's going to dedicate it. Well, I didn't care about the Roebling Building, but I had never interviewed Richard Nixon before. So we wait, and Richard Nixon walks out. And this is how things change, the thing that Chris ran into and Dick ran into. Two Secret Service guys come out, and all they do is look at us and say, come on, you guys know the rules. That's all they said. And Richard Nixon just walked up, and he stood on the steps. He put his hands in his pocket, and he just expounded for 15 minutes. And you could tell how smart he was at that time, what a gifted speaker he was. But the difference is no security, unbelievable lockdown security, and all these presidents now in their post-presidential days, the Secret Service says, come on, you know the rules. And that's the way it went.
Jay Lloyd, the radio side, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, you know, I'm going to take Terry's Terry's line one step further. Sure, the gotcha question. But when a president came to town, it was getting any question in. You wanted your question. You were a local reporter. You were at the news conference. Starts out pleasant enough because you're the only ones there. There's Bill, there's Terry, there's people you know, there are your friends around. It's going to change as soon as the national media arrives with the president. So what it is, it's something like walking into a free-for-all, knowing you're going to get beaten up. And in they come. It's a mob scene. Now you have to shout over everybody to get your question. Now, what is your question? It's pretty general. It has to be local, and you sat up all night thinking about your question, which usually started out, Mr. President, what do you think about? There's the word money, and then there's the word school district, transportation in Philadelphia, or something along those lines. Suddenly, it's open to questions. As Bobby would say, you gotta picture this. Everybody starts shouting. Now, we always had two women, no matter what the president was, two women who could shriek through any din like a submarine crash dive klaxon. Andrea Mitchell and Tia O'Brien come out. Many of you know. And they would get their question in. If you got yours, then there was the question, what were you going to do with it? You know, gee, look, Jay asked a question, and the president actually answered it. So that's the end line. That seems to be the goal. Get your question, you and the president, on the air at the same time. And that's where we were until somebody, some genius came up with the idea that in the day it happened, it was sometime in the George H.W. Bush administration, they came up with what they called the musical chair. There was a reporter from every station, and the president sat in a chair. You got maybe 3 minutes. I sit down in the chair, I ask my question, he answers it, I get the hell up, Bill sits down. He asks his question, president answers it, he gets up, Terry sits down. And at least it got rid of the chaos, but it didn't generate any information. And God help you if you ask the gotcha question.
Yeah. I want to bring up a cautionary tale that I just experienced. I've been in this market 38 years, and when I first came here, I thought I wanted to move up, and being a White House correspondent would be maybe one of the zeniths or the highest mountain you could get to. Well, it didn't happen, but this last election, I got sent to Chicago to be at Obama headquarters on election night. So I go out there, and some of you may remember Kristen Welker. We all watched her grow up here in town. Wonderful little lady, and she's now a White House correspondent. And we sat next to each other for a couple years at NBC 10, and when my cameraman and I got there, we went to the NBC staging area, which is on the risers, and there's Kristen, and she comes up and she puts her head on my shoulder, and she said, Terry, I haven't slept in the same bed for 2 nights in a row in a month now, because she was covering the president. So we exchange our pleasantries. I go about my business, she goes about hers, but we're working next to each other, and I work through the 11 o'clock news, and then I had to be on again at 5 o'clock in the morning, so I didn't have time to sleep. But what I was going to do was at least go back and shower and shave so I look presentable the next morning. So we go back to our hotel, leave Kristen there, come back, and the next morning I walk in, walk up on the risers, and here's Kristen's asleep over her computer.
Wow.
So she had been there all night long. We're standing there, and I'm doing shots into Philadelphia, and she's doing shots into the Today Show and Morning Joe and things like that. So I file for 11 o'clock in the morning news, and we take off and drive to O'Hare and come back to Philadelphia. Well, I'm having 2 fingers of scotch at 5 o'clock at night in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and I turn on the television, and here's Kristen Welker. But she's at the White House now. This woman, or any other person who has that White House beat, are not their own masters at all. You know, they are certainly the tail on the dog, and I don't think I could do that more than a week before I would go stir crazy or fall over from exhaustion. So, you know, what seemed 38 years ago when I came to Philadelphia like a goal that I wanted, I wouldn't touch it for the world.
Anybody up here cover a campaign? Did you
Yeah,
cover a campaign? Dick, you covered somebody?
Speaking of Richard Nixon, this was in the '68 campaign. And we had a Westinghouse News Bureau in Washington. They had about 13, Jay would remember this. And one of the guys who was going to follow a Western swing for Nixon became ill, and they called down the line and said, we need somebody to do it. So I got the call. I had just started in radio. And wow, all of a sudden went up to New York and greeted by Ron Ziegler, who was the press secretary of Richard Nixon. And I'm surrounded by all these old political pros, mostly print guys back then. And I totally intimidated, by the way. So got on the plane. There were a couple of planes. First, Nixon was in the front plane, and then the second tier, being a novice radio reporter, I was in the second tier. And we flew around different spots out west, and we're standing on the dock in Seattle, waiting to catch the hydrofoil. There's a hydrofoil there. And those, you talk about security, you know, the pre-thing. We all just stood around chatting with Nixon, waiting for the hydrofoil. So I said, well, what am I going to do? I'm not one of those great political reporters. I like humor. So I said, there was, just to backtrack a little bit, remember Laugh-In, a guy named Pat Paulson? He would run for president as a gag. So I said, well, maybe I could make a little piece out of that. I'm standing there waiting for the hydrofoil. I have my tape recorder. So I talked to Nixon. He was just a feet away. I said, I figured I could get something humorous out of him.
Out of Nixon?
Out of Nixon. Yeah, well, I learned. It wasn't easy. I said, well, Pat Paulson's thrown his hat into the ring. What do you think about that? And I figured he'd say something clever. And he said, well, everybody has a right to run in the United States. So, you know, that was it. I used the piece, but later on I understand he did go on Laugh-In. And he went into the Sakatumi thing. I guess he suddenly found humor in that. But that my great scheme about, you know, doing a little fun piece with Nixon on Pat Paulson, and Laugh-In, it was okay. But, you know, I just pick up on one thing about protocol in the White House. There was another occasion where we followed a family who was invited by Clinton, the Clinton White House, and they were invited into the Oval Office for a photo op. Right. So we followed in. We're standing there with a little rope there, and I said, you know, this local TV reporters, we're always thinking. So I turned around. I said to the camera, I want to do a stand-up in here, you know, stand-up close. So I turned around, did a 15 seconds worth with the president in the background in the Oval Office. It was, you know, really neat. I got the tap on the shoulders. We don't do that in the Oval Office. You don't do stand-ups in the Oval Office. And there was another reporter to my right who saw me do it, and they were all set to do it.
It was Baldini. Yes.
Yeah. No, it was Luann Kahn.
Yeah.
Okay.
She was all set to turn around and do a stand-up, but she saw how I was tapped. And
you know, that 68 campaign, so many of us got a piece, well, local reporters always got a piece of a major campaign. I had a whole campaign in 1968, all to myself. I may have been the only reporter. It was Harold Stassen. Does anybody remember Harold Stassen? Well, Harold Stassen was a brilliant guy. He constantly ran for president, and he lived and was an attorney, a practicing attorney. He was well into his 80s then, in Philadelphia. So when they said to me, you're going to cover Harold Stassen, he wants to run for president again. I was working for Kaiser Broadcasting at the time. We had the 10 o'clock news on Channel 48. I said, well, but I did it. So I go down there and I meet with Harold Stassen, and I said, this is my guy. He said one thing to me that made so much sense in the world, in that whole campaign. He says, I want to put everybody in the country on a 4-day work week So then they'll have more leisure time, and they'll spend more money at hotels, at restaurants, at national parks, and it'll straighten up the economy. I said, I'm with you. And that was it. And I think every week for the rest of that campaign, I had a Harold Stassen piece on the air, and people loved it.
Let me go around and ask anybody criticism you have in the media coverage now, the way we cover presidents, given how difficult this is to do. What do you think, Chris?
Well, it's you know, it's always a challenge, I think, to kind of strike that balance between being critical enough and then giving the president a pass. I've found in watching the coverage of different presidents that all of them are treated differently, and I think I kind of compare it to one of two ways. If the president's a boat, he's either on an ocean that has this undercurrent of cynicism with these waves of optimism from time to time, or he's on an ocean that is an undercurrent of optimism with a wave of cynicism from time to time. I see the Obama administration, I think, is largely seen as favorably by the press. They're the occasional
Right.
ripples of criticism. President Bush, George W. Bush, I think would be the opposite of that. But, you know, it's a challenge to kind of strike that balance to make sure that you're always holding the president responsible while at the same time, you know, giving the man a fair shake.
Bill, how about you?
I think the news media has lost its way.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the most important thing a news person should do is be objective. You should never know which side I'm on. And it really annoys me when I see the national press either fall all over somebody or be outwardly annoyed at someone. And I think that's absolutely wrong. I don't have any faith in people who do that. I mean, your job...
Do you think some of the presidents provoke this themselves? Whereas Bill Clinton, I disagree with Bill Clinton philosophically on a lot of things, but the one time I was around him, it's pretty hard not to be engaged by him. It's pretty
That's
hard
right.
not to.
He had that special personality.
Yeah.
You know, Richard Nixon did not have that kind
Exactly,
of personality.
yeah.
But it constantly bothers me when the news media does not present an objective picture. You should present the picture and say to you, you decide how you feel about this or that. And you shouldn't give them a free pass, nor should you pick on them. You know, you should just be fair. That's all people want. That's
Jay?
my feeling.
Yeah, one of the problems I have with the media, and it's getting worse and worse, and it almost appears as though the ratings drive the story. It's not the other way around. Tell a decent story. It's at the point now that the only show depicting news the way we'd like to see it is probably Newsroom on HBO. And that doesn't have a great audience and doesn't do news. But when the basic media, especially television and radio, cover these campaigns, they're covering tactics. They're giving Michiganers the same kind of weight that they'd give to a serious contender. You have to wonder what's going on. And if it isn't controversial, if you don't have people angry, shouting at each other, or crying on the air, they don't want to put it on.
Jay, let me challenge you. And people tell me, in TV business particularly, that's what the audience wants today. So what are you guys supposed to do?
That's a good question.
I know. I mean, I don't like the amount of snow coverage constantly. Today, I'm not sure, Chris, how much there is. But I know people in the TV business say that that's what the audience reacts to.
I think you have to do what you feel and what you know is right. That's why we have a separation. The sales departments don't get involved or are not supposed to get involved with the newsrooms. Now, we know there's a little gray area in there, but it shouldn't be. The problem is, in this country, we have so much competition. It's not like the BBC and one independent television station or two independent television stations. We're banging heads with each other.
Terry, my criticism would be with local news, I think it's pretty objective when it comes to presidential politics. There's no time, though. There's no ability to put too much in about it. And I realize when you see that the reaction Bill and others have had access to the president, is that local news can't get any access, and that's why there's almost nothing national.
Well, the average length for a story on television today is 90 seconds or less. That's who, what, where, when, how, why. And in that time, you're supposed to be objective about it. And I dare say a lot of people in this room could hold their breath for that long. But that's all the time that we're given. So I don't think that's fair at all. I don't think the media is fair in doing that. I think that the national news does a better job of balance, not only in the stories and their content, but in the type of stories. And let me just give you an example. I'm getting a little bit off the presidential coverage here, but I really enjoy most of the stations, and especially NBC and Brian Williams, when they end on one of those make a difference pieces. And it's talking about people and it's warm and fuzzy. Walter Cronkite used to do that also. He always had Charles Corral at the end, something that left you feeling good and you learned something. We don't do that in local news, at least not at Channel 10, and I don't think Channel 6 does. I'm not sure about 3, Chris, but we're told we're not going to do feature stories like that. So we're just
And
now,
reason why?
I can't speak for management. I think that they want to come across as just this news machine. Our big ploy, I don't work there anymore, so I should say their big ploy, at Channel 10 now is playing it forward. So let's say there are 10 facts in a story, and we'll give you 3 of them at 4, but Dom, we'll give you 3 more at 5. And if you stick around, we'll give you 3 more at 6. It's called driving the audience. And that's the way local news, I think, operates today. I think it's manipulative. I understand why they do it, because there's that fight for an audience that keeps getting smaller and smaller. But you think about this. Walter Cronkite had 44 million viewers a night.
Right.
44 million viewers a night. And right now, there's no network show that has over 7 or 8. So the pie is so much smaller, and the competition is so much greater, and I think they just keep trying to reinvent themselves. Now, I'm getting away from our presidential topic, but I think it's philosophical on news in general, which the presidential coverage falls under.
Dick?
First of all, as far as politics and local news, I think a lot has to do with the city. For example, in Chicago, they do politics in local news. At long pieces. Boston is a big political market. As far as Chris and I were talking earlier, he started out in Little Rock, which is another great political market. Philadelphia was never a big political market. Local stations here, I mean, you can never throw the word bias at the local stations because they really don't do politics. There are no political editors. Once upon a time, there was, way back in the early days, a guy by the name of Mark Forrest. Yeah, he was a great reporter, particularly when it came to politics. And he actually covered politics. But you don't have that, and you haven't had that in years and years and years. One other observation about the White House press corps, I think they seem to be intimidated somewhat from asking the hard questions. And there were a couple of them just in the last couple of days. I guess it was yesterday or the day before President Obama held the news conference. There were a couple of tough questions, and your ears perked up because it's been so unusual. I don't know what the reason is. Of course, they want to stay. They're there every day, and they don't want to, be soured, to be out of the loop. So I think there's a certain amount of that. But as far as the local stations go, in Philly, we've never really done politics the way other cities have done it. I guess we just never had the stomach for it. I don't know.
You know, I will say too, I've always felt like when it comes to media toughness and the president, it's really always more a matter of demeanor than it really is a consistent toughness in reporting. In fact, there was a study that I was reading about the other night, thinking about today, that found that from 1953 on, which was Harry Truman, I guess, so from Harry Truman until now, that Time Magazine, the New York Times, and CBS News, they looked at all the stories they had done on the chief executive, and by a 2-to-1 margin, those stories tended to be favorable. So this idea that, and in theory, the press should be adversarial and they should be challenging a White House and holding their feet to the fire, I'm not sure that really exists. It's one thing to see Jake Tapper stand up, in the East Room and ask a really tough question of the president, but is his news organization following up that night and the next night and the next night and the next night and holding the administration accountable? Sometimes I think that's not what happens, unfortunately.
Anybody have a question for our panel up here today? Anybody have a question about the presidency and broadcasting? Yes.
Yes. Have any of you ever, this is a tough question, have you ever been told in one way or another not to be objective or fair in covering a specific candidate?
Never,
No.
never.
To jump on the top of that, we used to have a fairness doctrine. Fairness doctrine isn't in effect anymore. It went out with Ronald Reagan. It just did away with it. So while as a professional, you would want to be fair, there's no management dictum that you have to be fair now. There's nobody holding your feet to the fire. The Federal Communication Commission watered that down a long time ago. Just a point.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
We engineers spent a lot of time with the president. I started out with Jack Kennedy, and when he running for president, I had a big metal dolly of the camera. He came and sat on my dolly, took his shoes off, and said, my feet are killing me. Anyhow, we got in the conversation, found out I was in the Navy with him. I'm in the Pacific for all the battles that he was there. We had to be good friends that way. And my wife's over there, and she prayed. He says, who's that? I said, that's my wife. He got up and gave her a big hug.
Well, that's
I worked for every president except Nixon. And I remember when Dewey was running against Truman, he was a real dictator. He came in, he sat in the conference with us. He said, remember, I'm running this now. You do what I tell you to do. A real nasty guy, but we were happy to see Truman beat. So sometimes we were doing Eisenhower at the Academy of Music. We had more cables on the stage. So I got out and I checked the cables, make sure everything's okay. And a voice says, what are you doing there? And I turn around and look at the guy with the gun, Secret Service. Yeah. And, but I then like I said, the only one was next.
Well, you know, it's interesting, too. I think that really the idea of the celebrity presidency is something that is, in a way, fairly new. If you go and you look at the media prior to say, 1920, it was all print media. And print media before that time was much more likely to write about the Congress or the Supreme Court as far as what was going on in Washington. It wasn't really until radio came along and then exploded and television followed that medium, those two mediums, really started paying attention to the presidency. FDR probably was the first to really take advantage of it with the fireside chats. Jack Kennedy, which you mentioned, obviously a media star. Ronald Reagan had a unique ability, Bill Clinton. So our celebrity media, our celebrity presidency, rather, really is an outbranch of radio and television.
Bill Baldini, I pick up on something, too, hearing the engineer and a couple of other things that I've seen, that presidents have to be more guarded today. I mean, Jack Kennedy, the stuff he obviously was doing, reporters didn't think it was anything that had to do with the presidency. Today, with cell phones and picking up the slightest thing, and then the 24-hour news cycle. So I have a sense that part of the problem is these guys are very, very guarded today, much more so maybe. You're not going to see a president wandering around talking to anybody. It's all scripted.
You're absolutely right. There's a big difference. I think they're so afraid of bad publicity that they'll just do about anything to avoid it, and certainly their handlers are that way.
Right, and it's the
won't even let
profusion
you
of
get near
handlers, too. I mean, up and down the line. I just came for doing Governor Corbett, and even with Corbett, the handler, we do a monthly show. It's exclusive. You got to go through Ajita if it's a question that's Corbett, the governor, who sits there and talks.
He must be a tough interview.
Dom, do they want to know what subjects you're going to approach? If not word for word, do they want to know what do you want to talk to them about?
Yeah, we give it to them in advance, and then in the middle of it, we shift around a little bit and change screen.
Yeah, but one of the things these presidents and presidential candidates have learned is how to use the public relations value of the media.
Right.
And they're consistently, one example, and I'll be brief. During the 1963 Civil Rights March on Washington, which you may remember, here's Martin Luther King on the Lincoln Memorial, and here's the press, would be to the left of King on the balcony, same balcony. Well, it is a broiling hot day. People are falling over from heat prostration out in the crowd, hundreds of thousands of people there. And here comes Hubert Humphrey and staff with cases of cold, ice cold water. Now, where does he take the water? Not to the prostate people, up to the press. and they're handing out, and there's Hubert, here, have a bottle. But they know how to use it.
Absolutely. Dick?
Before we wrap, Henry and Bobby Schaffner, this is a little, I'm the only one with a prop. Anyway.
The television.
Yeah, right. Bobby gave this to me to bring to your attention. They wrote this song about Jimmy Carter. This is the sheet music. He signed the sheet music. I don't know, we're not going to sing it today. But she has, you have some other things as well, as far as, yeah. If you want to do a little follow-up after the program, see her and take a closer look at this and a little presidential memorabilia.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Year 2000 is when I left Channel 6 due to another circumstance I couldn't control. Every time a president came in or we had to go do something with the president, we were vetted. We were vetted by the Secret Service.
Sure.
I mean, my wife was vetted. Everybody, my dog was vetted. What is done now? Does anybody get vetted?
You're vetted to a degree. My history with the presidency, I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, and actually started my career there in 1993 when Bill Clinton was in the White House. So from the time that I really hopped into broadcasting, I've been covering presidential politics. I went from Arkansas to Boston, where John Kerry ran, and then, of course, here. But I think anytime, it's a pretty simple process. You give your name, you give your city of birth, you give your social security number. I think they do a background check on you to make sure you're not insane or posing any kind of danger. But for the most part, it's a pretty simple process.
Yes, Jim.
Statement. First of all, I was there with Martin Luther King covering that day.
Did you get water?
I got no water. No, there was water in the tent where we were filing story. I sat 2 seats away from Eric Severai while he was on the typewriter, and I'm on the typewriter, of course. I was nowhere near where Eric Severai was, except physically. But it was brutally hot. There's no question about it. People were passing out. But we had enough water in our tents where we were doing our stories. However, as far as White House news conferences are concerned, the White House media, they are a private club. They look down on every local reporter there, and you're lucky as hell if you're able to say anything. I shouted time and again, and got shouted down by those women that they were talking about, because I couldn't get a word in edgewise. So I never got a question, or rather a response from Jack Kennedy when I was doing it. But all I'm saying is that they are so, you use the word intimidation. Those reporters are so intimidated by their private club to save their jobs. It's almost like you'll never hear anything controversial as far as the question is concerned that would put them in the light and have the cameras focused on them because they asked the wrong question. So whatever you see in a White House news conference, it's going to be the same stuff.
Well, and it's gotten to the point now where President Obama actually walks in with a list, a prepared list, where he knows exactly who he's going to call on.
It's difficult. When I watch it with some presidents, this president has a tendency really to filibuster. But you can't interrupt. It's the president. There's not a follow-up. There's not too much you're going to do. He's going to go anywhere he wants with it. So you're
use up the time on his favorite stuff.
well, exactly right. Yes.
Actually, you took a little bit of the question away. The last time I remember a reporter being successful, and as you mentioned, that it's very difficult to do something to a president that sort of throws him off. And the last time I remember that being done was Dan Rather, when he did it to Nixon.
Yeah.
And he said something, and then I think he said something to Nixon, how about you, Mr. President?
Running for office. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
But when I watch Obama's press conferences, I always have the feeling that he has actually given the questions to you what you're supposed to say. That he calls on you in a certain order, and he's got his teleprompters. Because I don't know, in many ways I think that, I know you have to, I believe that the news should be presented without any kind of bias, any bias. Nevertheless, every speech he makes, everything he does is written by someone else.
President Obama really thinks. He doesn't speak off the cuff.
I've been very difficult, but yeah.
Yeah, you know,
Exactly.
that's the challenge, and I think the goal for a journalist is not so much to try and throw a president off, but it's to try to get an honest moment out of them more than anything else.
Yeah.
People would actually, they would do the shouting. When did it all automatically stop?
And Sam Donaldson made a career off shouting
That's what I
questions
was
at Ronald
I was
Reagan.
going to start with you, Chris, and go down the line. My favorite presidential duo would be Donaldson and Ronald Reagan. Donaldson was asking hard questions, but there was a give and take. There was a connection, hey, you know, that kind of thing, the fun thing with it, not to the death. And some good things came out.
Sure. No, I absolutely think that's true. I think there were good relationships. Britt Hume and George H.W. Bush had a very good relationship. I mean, I think when we're talking about the White House press corps, it has become more of an isolated entity from the president than it was 15, 20 years ago. And you mentioned the isolation, and I could just speak directly to this past campaign. At the beginning of the campaign, I called a guy who I'd worked with closely when I was in Boston covering the Romney administration when he was governor of the state. And this guy was a senior advisor at the top of the Romney campaign. And I let him know, I said, listen, I'm in Philadelphia now. I said, I basically opened up the world of this region to him as the campaign was starting out in the primaries. I said, we cover southeastern PA, we're in South Jersey. I said, this is a real, I want to give your guy an opportunity to get on the air here. And I couldn't get a message back from the guy. I couldn't get him to return a call or an email.
Got him
and we
for
wound
6 minutes.
We wound up, yeah, that's 6 minutes more than we did the entire campaign. So it seems like it's changed so much to where there once were relationships built between the journalists and the politicians, and now they're kept at an arm's length. And I think certainly in Romney's case, it served to his disadvantage.
I agree. Go ahead, Terry.
I think the watershed moment was Watergate. And I think before that, the press knew that Jack Kennedy was messing around. They knew FDR was messing around. He had these mistresses, but they kept those things quiet. And I'm not sure it's a good old boys network, but they kept them quiet. But I think the country was so outraged at what happened during Watergate that all of a sudden there was this call for transparency. It has to be transparent. We want to know what those people are doing. And I think what's happened is the pendulum has completely swung. So transparency could be, you know, he had an accident in the bathroom. I mean, there's no privacy anymore, but I think it all started with this Watergate outrage from the country of they would do that. Right. We want to, you know, our presidents to be accountable, and I think we've taken it much too far.
Well, I would agree. And when the presidents have to say, guess what, my daughters are off limits, we'll come after you, be it Obama, be it Bush, be it the others, that it's gotten to the point that you're going to try to probe the children in this. It's pretty bad.
Yeah. You know, picking up on what Chris said about the Romney campaign, one of the things we're overlooking now is the impact of social media and the internet. Changed the ball game big time. It could have been, I can't get into the head of the campaign staffer, but the effect of what's going on, and since we're in radio and television, and you know, it's kind of visible. But the social media and the whole internet thing is kind of under the radar.
I would tell you this, though, Dick, I agree more with Chris for this reason. One of the reasons Romney lost, the modern candidate has to take relatively safe guys like Chris, given how they vetted him, or Jay Leno. Maybe you don't go on Letterman because Letterman's hostile to you. If you can't go on Jay Leno, you can't go on The View, you're not going to be president. It's pretty simple because if you can't handle those folks, I'm convinced, I don't think you can handle what a president has to do.
There's no question. You are absolutely right. But I think we're overlooking the impact of the internet and the social media.
Well, we have to believe radio and TV are still king. Come on now, Dick.
Well, Tom, Robin
I'm with you.
All right, I'm getting the sign here from our master, though, Jerry Wilkinson. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to Chris May, Bill Baldini, Jay Lloyd, Dick Sheeran, and Terry Ruggles.